It's Momo Monday, your weekly dose of mental, emotional, and physical softness, courtesy of his fuzziness. You know what to do. Breathe in. And out. And breathe in. And out. And Scout tried to break stuff while we were breathing. Good job, Scout. Scout is a little cannonball of the kittens. And yes, you will be treated this week to a 15-minute video of Scout, Bobby, and Link Scout, Zelda, and Link absolutely fascinated by a running tap. 15 minutes of kitten entertainment provided by water. It happens. But yes, what to do during the holidays when you cannot stand your family. And let's face it, this is something that affects more of us than some of us would like to admit. Even if you like some members of your family, everybody has a member of their family they just can't stand. And personally, it takes a lot for me to actively dislike a person. I have gotten better over the years at trusting that little voice, inside your gut saying, this person's a problem, because there's usually a reason for that. So if you have that dynamic in your family, feel consoled to some extent that you are far, far from alone. And I think that's part of the reason that it bothers people an extent, that in the media we see this, false depiction of an idyllic family Christmas. And that's just not the reality for anyone I know, really. There's always somebody, it's that Lion King line. There's one in every family, two in mine, and they always manage to ruin special occasions. And it's true. There's always someone who takes liberties with their family because they themselves are unhappy and basically takes it out on everybody else. And because it's family, you're expected to take it. Now, first of all, make sure you're not that person. If you're getting really drunk at family events, time to reconsider. If you have to get high before you go to your family's event, time to reconsider. You should not have to rely on substances to do any social stuff. If you find it fun, that is one thing. But if you feel like you have to, then reconsider what you're doing. Because the reason that people drive us crazy, and I can say this with relative certainty on this channel because I'm pretty anti-outrage warrior. So people on this channel are not the type that shun people for having a difference of opinion. You can't be around certain people because they don't respect your boundaries. They pick on you, they make you feel bad, or they push you into circumstances and conversations that make you decidedly uncomfortable and don't respect the word stop. And that's my first advice for gamers specifically, because a lot of us are introverts. And one thing I had to learn because of my particular family dynamic is if you don't tell someone to stop, they probably won't stop. It's not enough to say nothing. You actually have to be proactive and actually use the word stop. And some people are like, well, make sure you say it in a nice way. I personally don't care how you say it. No means no, stop means stop. And if they can't respect that, then you have the absolute right to remove yourself from that situation. And that's another thing a lot of people don't really realize. You do have the right to get up and walk away. And if mom or dad gives you grief about it, well, guess what? They're part of the problem. And, one of the dysfunctional dynamics in a lot of families is everybody has to stay at the table and children wait to be excused. And I think there's merit to teaching kids that there's a time and a place to sit down and shut up and just be patient. but there's more at play in these family holiday dynamics, aren't they? And if someone is being inappropriate, if someone is upsetting people, then there's no need. No one should be forced to sit around and watch that or sit around and take that. Because when people are forced together, things happen. When people are forced to watch someone's humiliation, that makes the humiliation worse. And a lot of the time, family, and this is going to be something that people are probably going to react strongly to, but your family probably knows less about you than your friends do, just because of the myths surrounding family that a lot of families buy into. Your family probably doesn't really know what your favorite things are. Your family probably doesn't really know the things that really bother you, because I find a lot of gamers are the peacemakers or the stress gaps in their family. By stress gap, you know that part on the bridge that they build deliberately to have a gap in it, so as the bridge expands and contracts, then the bridge doesn't break completely. Well, there's people like that in every family that everybody just takes for granted and dumps on because it helps keep the peace. You're always the person that gives in. You're always the person that compromises. You're always the person that changes your schedule so that other people aren't inconvenienced. And that can build up a lot of stress. And it's very noble to want to keep the peace, but sometimes fights have to happen. And at the end of it all, keep in mind that it is just another day. We put a lot of symbolism on the holidays, but it's just another day. And I personally think that we need more excuses to celebrate throughout the year, so that these milestone days like Thanksgiving, like Christmas, like these things don't become these massive charged things. But we can't necessarily be in control of that in our families. And so if all this stuff works and you're still feeling pretty crappy, well, what can you do? Well, like I said in last week's video, make sure you're taking care of yourself. Make sure you're doing something that makes you happy. Have the conversations you want to have. Associate with the people that you want to associate, because it makes dealing with the people you don't like a lot easier. If you're constantly involved in misery, then it's going to be harder to suck that up. I mean, if you know that you're just going to go home and you're going to play 4 hours of video games, and that's going to be your way of rewarding yourself after the whole thing happens, well, it's going to be a lot easier to get through. And yeah, this is something you get through. This isn't something you succeed or fail at. There are a lot of people involved. This is not an action shooter, guys. Family dinners have the dynamics of a survival horror game. You can't necessarily fight back, or you have very limited ammo, and all the purpose is to survive, to get out intact with your closest friends, preferably. And that sounds awful, but it really is true, isn't it? I mean, if you're going to look strictly at the mechanics of family holiday dinners, it is indeed survival horror. It is not action shooter. And that's something important to keep in mind, because as gamers, we contextualize our expectations of an encounter based on genre. You know, remember, your holiday dinner with your family is a survival horror game. And that probably helps a lot in getting yourself in the right headspace for it. Because what do you do in survival horror? You evade, you distract, and you choose your moments to shut things down, right? You choose your moments to take out that enemy, but you're not going to take out every enemy, because you can't. You don't have enough ammo and you'll get overwhelmed. So approach it like that. And obviously, you know, quiet and staying in the darkness is a big survival horror tactic. And if you can avoid it as much as you possibly can. Now, I know that I get nagged like crazy if I'm physically removed. So the best thing to do is just sort of sit in a conversation and go to your happy place. So you're physically there. No one can claim you're being antisocial, but you are not really paying attention. And there's a lot of conversations where it's a lot easier to be pleasant when you're really not paying attention. And there's a lot of like colds and flus and things like that going around. So if you get caught not paying attention, you can just go, sorry, I'm really not feeling well. I'm not myself. And that's the end of it. But what if somebody does get under your skin? And it happens, I know. The most upsetting thing for me about that stuff is why other people involved don't see that it's upsetting you and tell the other person to knock it the hell off, right? Well, that person is usually a bully, and the other people, as much as they may smile, are probably intimidated by that person, and they don't want them turning on them and making them the object of their attentions. And so they don't intervene. And that's very cowardly. And sometimes you are in a situation, your family has a dynamic where you can say to someone in advance, like, look, this person really bothers me, especially when they get on this subject. I don't want to talk about it. So if they start, can you please change the subject? Or can you please tell them to stop? Because I can't. They don't listen to me. Some families respect that, and some families will help you out that way. Others won't. They'll do the, just don't let him bother you. Don't let him get to you. He talks that way to everybody. And that's not caring behavior. That's a lack of understanding of why personal boundaries are important, but it's a very common dynamic in a lot of different families, and you have to find a way to negotiate that. Sometimes just telling yourself the person is a bully is enough. You might be able to avoid them. You might be able to diffuse the situation with humor, but please be very careful doing that, because humor is subjective. One person's humor is another person's being an asshole, and you don't want to be turned into the villain of this passion play, right? So avoiding somebody is not just about physically avoiding them. It's about not listening to them in some cases. And if this person really gets under your skin and your family is of no help, my attitude is, if they're not helping you, who cares what they think? And I know it's your family, but if you have that sort of family dynamic, then you're probably not going to be ostracized because this other person wasn't ostracized either. Now, that is not true if you're that stress gap in the family. If you're the stress gap and you stop fulfilling that role, you will get a huge negative response when you try to be a person in your own right. So be prepared for that. The best thing a family stress gap that person paving over the weak spot in the family, the best thing they can do certain holidays is not be available. For whatever reason, you're just not available. You're somewhere else, you're doing charity work, you're doing whatever, you have to work. Doesn't always work. I had a family member who tried to dodge family dinner one year by claiming they had to work on Christmas, and the boor of the family loudly went, on Christmas. And it was this unspoken thing that, yeah, nobody likes this guy, but he's right. This was a dodge. And it was very awkward. So be very careful with that one. But there does come a point in time where you just have to not care what other people think. And this is a difficult one. I say this with extreme caution because my whole life I've been treated like a freak. And so after a while, you just stop caring. You really don't put a lot of stock in other people's opinions. Now people think that's an ideal, but it's not necessarily an ideal. I had to work to realize that sometimes what people think of you matters. And so it's funny, there's a lot of people that accuse me of, you care way too much what people think. And that's not true. It's that caring what people think is not natural for me. it's a social skill that is not intuitive for me. And yes, caring what people think is a social skill. Knowing the time and place to do it is a social skill. And so I may discuss it more than a normal person does because I'm trying to figure out whether this is worth giving a damn about. But it's also, I try on this channel to be honest about my own thoughts and my own feelings about things. So when I talk to you guys about this kind of stuff, it doesn't seem like a platitude, because I recognize that dealing with difficult people is not easy. It's especially not easy for people who are as emotionally intuitive as gamers. And that's one of the big problems I have with the gamer stereotype, the whole idea that gamers are socially awkward nerds. I think part of the reason a lot of gamers are so socially awkward is because being social is awkward. And I find that gamers tend to be, not all, obviously, there's different types of people who game, but a lot of gamers are very emotionally tuned in people. They're very sensitive, they're very artistic, and the foolishness of a lot of social interactions is something that doesn't make a lot of sense to us. And while there are some gamers that'll just go in there and, pwn noobs and all that stuff and blow everyone away and pretend to not be sensitive, I see through that. And I know that part of the reason you're doing that is because it's simple. It's simple and nobody's getting hurt. And that nobody's getting hurt element is so key to being a gamer. Because why are we okay with playing these blood and guts games? Because it's not real. Why are we okay with shooting fictional enemies in the head? Because they're fictional. And that reality of it's not real is so important, because, and that defense is brushed aside, but it's critical. It's critical that gamers recognize this stuff isn't real, because that's an indication that it matters in the real world, right? That's an indication that you wouldn't do that in the real world. And you live in a world where there's a lot of people who would. If they could get away with it, they would shoot somebody in the head. If they could get away with it, they would physically menace the people around them. And most gamers I have met are not like that. So unfortunately, if one person who is like that gets into a group, into a social setting where there are those sensitive, introverted, they even call the personality type intuitive sensitive. I think there's a lot of intuitive sensitive gamers, but you get one person who actually is a bully in those, and they can wreak havoc. Because it's not a fair emotional fight. So remember when you're dealing with people like this, it is not an action shooter. It is a survival horror game. And if you'll do that, you'll probably be okay. So let's close off with breathing. Breathe in. And out. And breathe in.